My DNA test results absolutely ruined my entire family. Now my uncle turns out to be my father, and everything is complete chaos. My husband is 32 years old and I am 29. We have been married for 5 years and together since college. We are both pretty stable people, good jobs, nice house, 2 cats. One of our shared hobbies, if you can call it that, is genealogy. We find it really interesting to dig into family history. Last year, for Christmas, Mark and I bought each other those DNA ancestry kits. We thought it would be fun to see where our families came from and maybe find some distant relatives or something. Never imagined I would need to post on our relationship advice, but here we are. We sent off our kits and honestly forgot about them for a few weeks. Then, one day, I got an email saying my results were ready. I logged in, excited to see what I would find. It was all pretty standard at first, percentages of different ethnicities. Cool, but nothing earth-shattering. Then I started looking at the family matches. That's where things got weird. I saw my dad, Robert, listed as my father, which was obviously correct. But the percentage of DNA we shared was off, like way off. It said we were related, but at a much lower percentage than a typical father-daughter relationship. I double-checked everything, made sure I was looking at my results and not Mark's by accident. Nope, it was definitely me and definitely my dad, Robert. I showed Mark. He is much better at this kind of stuff than I am. He looked at it for a while, doing some calculations on his phone. He looked up at me, kind of serious. "Jenna," he said, "this is really strange." "According to this, Robert is not your biological father," I laughed. "No way," I said. "This test must be wrong. There is no way my dad is not my dad. I look just like him, for one thing, and my parents have been married forever." "It's just a mistake." Mark was still looking at the screen. He pointed to some other matches. "See this," he said. "Your Uncle David, Robert's brother, is listed as a much closer relative than he should be. Like uncle-level close, but almost half-sibling close. Does that make sense?" No, it absolutely did not make sense. My Uncle David, he is like a second dad to me. I have always been close to him and my Aunt Carol and their kids, but Uncle Close not, whatever this was suggesting. I felt like I was in some kind of bizarre movie. "Okay," Mark said, "let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe there is some other explanation. Maybe there was a mistake at the lab. Maybe we should call the DNA company." But in my gut, I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, staring at the DNA results on my computer screen. I kept going back and forth between disbelief and a creeping sense of dread. That evening, my parents came over for dinner like they usually do on Tuesdays. My mom, Susan, brought her famous lasagna. My dad, Robert, brought the wine. Everything seemed normal, too normal. I felt like I was living in a sitcom where everyone is oblivious to the bomb about to drop except for me. I tried to act normal, chatting about work and the cats and the weather, anything to avoid the elephant in the room, which was, apparently, my questionable paternity. But it was eating me up inside. I kept glancing at my dad, trying to see if he looked any different. He looked like my dad. My dad, who had taught me to ride a bike, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, always been there for me. Could this really be wrong? After dinner, when Mark was doing dishes and my dad was distracted by the cats, I pulled my mom aside into the living room. "Mom," I said, "can we talk for a minute?" She looked at me, concerned. "Of course, honey, what is it?" "You seem a little quiet tonight." I took a deep breath. "Mom," I said, "Mark and I did those DNA tests. The ancestry ones. And well, something weird came up with mine." She frowned. "Weird how? Did you find out you are secretly related to royalty or something?" She laughed a little, but I could tell she was also a little nervous. "My mom is a worrier." "It's not funny, Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little. "It says that Dad, that Robert, is not my biological father." The lasagna she had just eaten almost reappeared, I swear. Her face went white. "What?" she whispered, like she was afraid someone would overhear, even though it was just us in the living room. "That's impossible. What are you talking about?" I showed her the results on my phone, pointing to the percentages and the family matches. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. She scrolled through it, zooming in, squinting like she was trying to decipher ancient hieroglyphics. This can't be right," she stammered. "This has to be a mistake. These tests are not always accurate, right? I have heard that." "Mom," I said gently, "I don't think it's a mistake. Look at the matches with Uncle David. It's saying he is almost as closely related to me as a half-sibling. That doesn't make any sense unless. I couldn't even say it out loud. The idea was too crazy, too unbelievable, too incestuous sounding. But the results were right there in black and white on my phone screen. My mom sank down onto the sofa, like her legs had given out. She looked like she was about to faint. "Jenna," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you have to promise me you will not say a word of this to your father, or to David, or to anyone. Promise me." "But Mom," I said, "I need to understand. What is going on? Is it possible? Is Uncle David—" She put her hand up, stopping me. "Just promise me, Jenna," she repeated, her eyes pleading. "Promise me you will keep this quiet, please, for my sake, for your father's sake. For the family." I hesitated. I wanted answers. I deserved answers, but I could see the sheer panic in my mother's eyes. I knew she was terrified. And honestly, I was scared too. Scared of what the truth might be. Scared of what it would do to my family. "Okay, Mom," I said softly, "I promise, for now, but I need to know the truth." Eventually, she let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Jenna," she said. "Thank you. Just give me some time, please." I nodded. Time for what? Time to come up with a believable lie. Time to figure out how to bury this secret even deeper. I did not know, but I agreed to give her time. What else could I do? The rest of the evening was a blur. My parents left shortly after that, my mom looking pale and shaken, my dad completely oblivious to the bombshell that had just been dropped in our living room. Mark and I went to bed in silence, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air between us. The next few days were excruciating. I was walking around with this massive secret, this potential family apocalypse, churning inside me. I felt like I was going to explode. I tried to act normal at work, with friends, with my family. It was exhausting. Every time I saw my dad or my Uncle David, I felt a wave of nausea. Was it possible? Could Uncle David really be my father? The thought was so unthinkable. My mom was avoiding my calls. Or if she did answer, she would just say she was busy and would call me back later, which she never did. I knew she was deliberately stonewalling me. She was hoping I would just forget about it, I guess. Or that the DNA test was wrong after all, but I couldn't forget. And deep down, I knew the test was not wrong. Finally, after a week of this torture, I decided I could not take it anymore. I had to talk to my mom, face to face. I drove over to her house, unannounced, on a Saturday afternoon. I knew my dad was out golfing with his buddies, including Uncle David, ironically. Perfect timing. I rang the doorbell and my mom opened the door, looking surprised and not exactly thrilled to see me. "Jenna," she said, "what are you doing here? I told you I was busy." "Mom," I said, "we need to talk, really talk. I can't keep living like this. I need to know the truth." She sighed and let me in. She led me into the kitchen, and we sat down at the table. She looked tired and stressed, like she had not slept in days, which, knowing my mom, was probably true. "Okay, Jenna," she said, her voice resigned. "What do you want to know?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, is it possible that Uncle David is my father, biologically?" She closed her eyes for a moment like she was in pain. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, Jenna," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it is possible. It's true. David is your biological father." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, was suddenly shattered. My Uncle David, my father. It was too much to process. I stared at her, speechless. Tears started to well up in my eyes. "How?" I finally managed to choke out. "How could this happen? When? Why?" She took a shaky breath and started to talk. It was a long, painful story. A story of secrets and lies and betrayal. A story that had been buried for almost 30 years and now was finally being dragged out into the light. It happened a long time ago, Mom began. Before you were born. Back when Robert and I were first married. We were young, just starting out. Things were difficult. Robert was working long hours trying to get his business off the ground. I was lonely. And David was always around. He was Robert's best friend, his brother. He was always there to help out, to lend a hand. We spent a lot of time together, just talking, just being there for each other. She paused, looking down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around and around her finger. It just happened, she said quietly. One night after a family party, we were both feeling vulnerable. We had too much to drink. And then we made a mistake, a terrible mistake. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. It was just one time, Jenna, she said. One stupid, drunken mistake. We both regretted it instantly. We were both ashamed. We swore we would never tell anyone, especially Robert. It would have destroyed him, and Carol, and the whole family. So you kept it a secret all these years? I asked, my voice tight with emotion. All this time? Yes, she said. We had to, for everyone's sake. We thought we had gotten away with it. We thought it was buried forever. And then you came along, and you looked so much like Robert. Everyone said so. We thought we were safe. We thought the secret was safe. But it wasn't safe, was it? I said bitterly. It was a lie, a huge, life-altering lie, and you have been living with it all these years. How could you? She started to cry, tears streaming down her face. I know, Jenna, she sobbed. I know it was wrong. I know I messed up. But I did it for love, for Robert, for our family. I did not want to lose him. I did not want to destroy everything we had built together. Love, I repeated, incredulous. You call that love? Lying to your husband for 30 years. Lying to your daughter her whole life. That's not love, Mom, that's betrayal. She did not say anything. She just kept crying. I felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and confusion swirling inside me. My whole world had just been turned upside down. My dad was not my dad. My uncle was my father. My life was a lie. What about Uncle David? I asked finally. Does he know? Has he known all this time? She shook her head. No, she said. David does not know. He never knew. Only I knew. I never told him. I could not. It would have been too much. So you have been carrying this secret alone all these years? I asked, feeling a strange mix of pity and resentment towards my mother. Yes, she said, alone. It has been a burden, a terrible burden. I sat there in silence for a long time trying to process everything she had told me. It was like a bad soap opera. Unbelievable, yet here I was living it. My mom, my sweet, kind, lasagna-making mom, had been living a lie for 30 years. And I was the product of that lie. What about Dad? I asked finally. Robert, does he know anything? Does he suspect? She shook her head again. No, she said. He has no idea. He trusts me completely. He loves me. He loves you. He would be devastated if he knew. And what about me? I said, my voice rising. What about how I feel? Don't I deserve to know the truth? Don't I deserve to know who my real father is? She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Jenna, she said, please just keep this a secret, for everyone's sake. What good would it do to tell them now? It would just cause pain. It would destroy our family. Can't we just leave it buried? Can't we just pretend this never happened? No, Mom, I said firmly. We cannot. I cannot. I need to know who I am. I need to know my real father. And Dad, Robert, he deserves to know the truth too. He has been living a lie for 30 years. He deserves to know the truth about his own daughter. She started to cry again, harder this time. Please, Jenna, she begged, don't do this. Don't ruin our family. Think of your father. Think of David and Carol. Think of your cousins. This will destroy everyone. But Mom, I said, it is already ruined. It has been ruined for 30 years. We just did not know it. And keeping it a secret is not going to make it better. It is going to make it worse. I stood up. I cannot promise you I will keep this quiet, Mom, I said. I need time to think. I need time to process this. But I cannot guarantee that I will keep this secret forever. It is too big, too important. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving my mother sobbing at the kitchen table. I felt numb, empty, and completely lost. My whole life felt like a fabrication, like I was living in someone else's story. I went home and told Mark everything. He listened patiently, holding my hand, letting me cry. He was shocked, of course, but also incredibly supportive. He said he would be there for me no matter what. He said we would figure this out together. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. I was angry at my mom for lying to me for so long. I was hurt that my dad was not my biological father. I was confused about my feelings towards Uncle David. And I was terrified of what this revelation would do to my family. I knew I could not keep this secret to myself forever. It was too heavy to carry alone, and I knew my dad deserved to know the truth, but I was also scared of the fallout. Scared of hurting him, of hurting my mom, of hurting Uncle David and Aunt Carol and their kids. Scared of destroying my family. After a lot of soul-searching and talking with Mark, I decided I had to tell my dad. He deserved to know. And I needed his support. He was still my dad in every way that mattered. He had raised me, loved me, been there for me my whole life. Biology did not change that. I called my dad and asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us. He agreed, sounding a little surprised. We met at our usual diner, the one we have been going to since I was a kid. I was a nervous wreck. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. "Dad," I said, after we had ordered and made some small talk, "there is something I need to tell you. Something really important, and really difficult." He looked at me concerned. "What is it, honey? You look upset." I took a deep breath. "Dad," I said, "Mark and I did those DNA ancestry tests. Remember? Well, something weird came up with mine. It says that you are not my biological father." He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? That's impossible." I showed him the DNA results on my phone, just like I had shown my mom. He took my phone and looked at it, his brow furrowed, his face growing pale. He scrolled through the results, zooming in, squinting, just like my mom had done. This is crazy," he stammered. "This has to be wrong. These tests are not always accurate, right?" "Dad," I said gently, "I don't think it's wrong. It is showing a very low percentage of DNA shared between us, and it is showing a much closer relationship between me and Uncle David than there should be." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. "David," he said. "What does David have to do with this?" I hesitated. This was the hardest part. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "Mom told me that a long time ago, before I was born, she and Uncle David." I could not even finish the sentence. I just looked at him, my eyes filled with tears. He stared back at me, his face slowly turning from pale to red. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Horrible, devastating understanding. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God, no, it can't be. Susan and David. My Susan and my brother." Tears started to stream down his face. He covered his face with his hands, sobbing. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad," I said softly, "I am so sorry. I know this is terrible." He shook his head, still sobbing. 30 years, he choked out. 30 years. And she never told me. Never said a word. "No, Dad," I said. "She never told anyone. She kept it a secret all this time." He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "And David? Does David know?" "No, Dad," I said. "Mom said David does not know. She never told him either." He was silent for a long time, just staring blankly ahead. Then he looked at me again, his eyes filled with pain and betrayal. "My whole life," he said, "my whole marriage, it has all been a lie." "Dad," I said, "it does not have to be a lie. You are still my dad. You always will be. You raised me, you loved me, you have always been there for me. That is what makes you my father, not biology." He managed a weak smile through his tears. "Thanks, honey," he said. "Thanks, Jenna. You are a good daughter, my daughter, no matter what." We sat there for a long time, talking, crying, trying to make sense of it all. My dad was devastated, heartbroken, betrayed. But he was also surprisingly strong. He said he needed time to process this, to think about what to do. But he thanked me for telling him the truth. He said he deserved to know. The next few weeks were incredibly difficult. My dad moved out of the house. He said he needed space from my mom. He was angry, hurt, and confused. He did not know if he could ever forgive her. My mom was a mess. She called me constantly, crying, begging me to talk to my dad, to convince him to come home. She said she was sorry, she regretted everything, she loved him, she could not live without him. Uncle David and Aunt Carol were completely in the dark. They had no idea what was going on. We had to keep the secret from them, at least for now. My dad did not want to confront David until he had a chance to process everything himself. Mark and I were caught in the middle of it all. We tried to support both my parents, to be there for them, to listen to them. It was emotionally draining and incredibly stressful. Our own relationship was strained. We were arguing more, snapping at each other. The weight of this family crisis was taking its toll. Then one evening, about a month after I told my dad the truth, I got a call from Uncle David. He sounded confused and upset. "Jenna," he said, "have you talked to your dad lately? He has been acting really weird. He is not answering my calls, he is avoiding me at golf, and Carol says Susan is a wreck. What is going on? Did something happen?" I hesitated. I knew I could not keep the secret from Uncle David any longer. It was starting to affect his relationship with my dad, with the whole family. He deserved to know the truth too. "Uncle David," I said, "there is something I need to tell you, something really difficult, something that is going to change everything." I told him everything. About the DNA test, about my mom's confession, about the secret that had been buried for 30 years. I told him that he was my biological father. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. I thought he had hung up. Then finally he spoke, his voice trembling. "Jenna," he said, this can't be true. This is some kind of sick joke, right? This is not real." "Uncle David," I said softly, "I wish it was a joke, but it is real. The DNA test does not lie. Mom confessed. It is true. You are my biological father." He was silent again, processing the information. Then he started to ask questions, lots of questions, about when it happened, about why my mom never told him, about how my dad was taking it. I answered as honestly as I could, trying to be gentle but also direct. When I finished telling him everything, he was still in shock, but also strangely calm. He said he needed to talk to my dad. He needed to hear it from him directly. He asked if I could arrange a meeting. I called my dad and told him that I had told Uncle David. He was not happy that I had broken the secret, but he also understood why I had to. He agreed to meet with David. The meeting between my dad and Uncle David was incredibly tense. I was not there, but Mark was, at my dad's request. He said he needed someone to be there for support. Mark said it was the most awkward and painful conversation he had ever witnessed. My dad told David everything, just like my mom had told me. David listened in stunned silence, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. When my dad finished, David just sat there for a long time, not saying anything. Then finally he spoke. "Robert," he said, I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I swear to you I never knew if I had known." My dad held up his hand, stopping him. "I know, David," he said. "I know you did not know. I am not blaming you. I am angry at Susan, betrayed by Susan, but not you, not really." David got up and went over to my dad. He put his hand on my dad's shoulder. "Robert," he said, "we are brothers, brothers always. This changes things, but it does not change us. We are still family. We will get through this, together." My dad looked up at David, tears in his eyes. "Thanks, David," he said. "Thanks, brother. That conversation was a turning point. It was the beginning of healing for my family. It was not easy, not at all. There were still a lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of pain. But it was also the beginning of honesty, of forgiveness, of moving forward." My dad and my mom started talking again. Slowly, tentatively, carefully. They had a lot to work through. 30 years of lies and secrets is not something you can just erase overnight. But they were trying. For each other, for me, for the family. Uncle David and Aunt Carol were also struggling to process everything. It was a huge shock for them too, especially for Carol. She felt betrayed by my mom, her best friend, but she was also incredibly supportive of David and of my dad. She understood that this was not David's fault, and me. Well, I was still processing it all too. I had a new father, a new uncle, a new family dynamic. It was weird and confusing and overwhelming, but it was also okay. Better than okay, actually, because the truth was out in the open. The secret was no longer poisoning our family from the inside. My dad and mom eventually decided to try to work things out. It was a long and difficult process, but they went to counseling, they talked, they listened to each other. And slowly, gradually, they started to rebuild their relationship. It was not the same as before, it could never be. But it was something new, something maybe even stronger, built on honesty and forgiveness. Uncle David and Aunt Carol remained a part of our family, as always. David and my dad's relationship was different, more complex, but still strong. They were brothers and that bond was unbreakable. And me and Uncle David, that was complicated. We had to figure out a new dynamic, a new relationship. He was my biological father, but he was also still my uncle. It was strange, but we were both committed to making it work. We started spending more time together, just talking, getting to know each other in this new context. It was awkward at first, but gradually it became more natural. He was a good man, my Uncle David, and apparently my father too. In the end, the DNA test did ruin my family in a way. It shattered our comfortable, predictable world. It exposed a secret that had been buried for 30 years. It caused pain and chaos and heartbreak, but it also brought us to the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was ultimately liberating. It allowed us to start healing, to start rebuilding, to start moving forward. And in the end, that was a good thing, a very good thing. My family is different now, forever changed. But maybe, just maybe, we are stronger because of it. And that is all that matters. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.